This is the story of one of the darkest chapters in criminal history in Colorado's remote mountain territories. What occurred during the harsh winter of 1931 challenges everything we understand about human nature and the bonds that supposedly protect us from our deepest impulses. The case of the Morrison twins has remained buried in dusty archives for decades, deliberately obscured by local authorities who understood that some truths are too disturbing to share with the world. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a like to help more people discover these forgotten chapters of history that demand to be remembered. The events I'm about to describe took place in Blackstone Ridge, an isolated mining settlement nestled deep in Colorado's Sangre de Cristo Mountains. This was a place where civilization held only the most tenuous grip, where the nearest law enforcement was 3 days' ride through treacherous mountain passes, and where the harsh realities of frontier life had already stripped away many of the social conventions that kept people civilized in more settled areas. In 1931, Blackstone Ridge was home to fewer than 200 souls, mostly miners and their families, who had come seeking their fortune in the silver veins that ran through the surrounding peaks. The settlement consisted of little more than a main street lined with rough-hewn buildings, a general store, a saloon, and a small schoolhouse that doubled as a church on Sundays. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, where secrets were difficult to keep, and where the isolation created bonds of necessity that often ran deeper than blood. Into this harsh environment were born Thomas and Theodore Morrison on a bitter February night in 1909. From the moment of their birth, the identical twins displayed an unsettling connection that went far beyond the typical bond shared by siblings. According to birth records preserved in the Custer County archives, the boys were so physically similar that even their mother, Elizabeth Morrison, had difficulty telling them apart. Their father, Samuel Morrison, worked the Esperanza mine and was frequently absent for days at a time, leaving the twins largely to their own devices as they grew. Dr. Harold Whitman, the settlement's only physician, maintained detailed medical records that provide our first glimpse into the disturbing nature of the twins' relationship. In entries dated throughout their childhood, Dr. Whitman noted numerous instances where injuries to one twin would manifest as sympathetic wounds on the other. When Thomas broke his arm falling from a tree in 1917, Theodore developed severe bruising in the exact same location, despite being nowhere near the accident. When Theodore suffered a deep cut from a mining tool in 1919, Thomas appeared at the doctor's office hours later with an identical wound that had seemingly opened spontaneously. Local residents, interviewed decades later by researchers, recalled that the twins seemed to communicate without words, finishing each other's sentences and displaying an almost supernatural awareness of each other's thoughts and intentions. Martha Henderson, who taught at the settlement's schoolhouse, wrote in her personal diary, preserved at the Colorado Historical Society, that the boys shared a single mind housed in 2 bodies, and that mind grew darker with each passing year. By the winter of 1930, when the twins had reached 21 years of age, their behavior had begun to concern even the hardy residents of Blackstone Ridge. Multiple witnesses, including store owner Jacob Mills and blacksmith Robert Chen, reported seeing the twins engaged in whispered conversations, where they would alternate speaking, as if carrying on both sides of a dialogue with themselves. More disturbing still were reports of the twins being seen in 2 different locations simultaneously, though this was generally dismissed as mistaken identity, given their identical appearance. The first sign of serious trouble came in November 1930, when livestock began disappearing from farms around the settlement. According to sheriff's reports filed by Deputy Marcus Webb, the animals weren't simply stolen, but appeared to have been subjected to deliberate torture before being killed. The carcasses, when found, displayed evidence of systematic mutilation that suggested the acts had been performed slowly and with considerable expertise in anatomy. Suspicion initially fell on predators or perhaps raiders from one of the displaced Native American tribes that still occasionally moved through the territory. However, tracks found at several scenes didn't match any known animal, and the precise nature of the wounds suggested human involvement. Dr. Whitman's examination of the remains, documented in reports now held at the National Archives in Denver, concluded that the killings had been performed by someone with detailed knowledge of animal physiology and an apparent desire to maximize suffering. The situation escalated dramatically in January 1931 when 7-year-old Sarah McKenna went missing while playing near her family's cabin. According to testimony recorded by Deputy Webb, Sarah's mother, Margaret McKenna, had sent the child to gather firewood from their woodshed around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. When Sarah failed to return by sunset, the entire settlement organized search parties that combed the surrounding forest throughout the night. Sarah's body was discovered the following morning by mine foreman Patrick O'Malley in a clearing roughly 2 miles from the settlement. The scene that greeted the search party defied comprehension and challenged the sanity of everyone present. According to O'Malley's sworn statement, filed with the territorial court and preserved in the Colorado State Archives, Sarah had been arranged in an elaborate tableau that suggested ritualistic purpose. The child's body showed no signs of violence or assault, yet she was clearly deceased. Dr. Whitman's autopsy, conducted with unusual thoroughness and documented in excruciating detail, revealed that Sarah had died of cardiac arrest brought on by extreme terror. Her body showed elevated levels of adrenaline and stress hormones that indicated she had been in a state of absolute panic for an extended period before her death. More disturbing than the cause of death was the scene itself. Sarah had been positioned in the center of an intricate pattern carved into the frozen ground, symbols that resembled no known writing system but seemed to follow some internal logic. Around the perimeter, personal belongings from other settlement residents had been arranged in precise geometric formations. Items that had been reported missing over previous months, things so mundane that their absence had barely been noticed, were now revealed to have been systematically collected. Among these items were a hair ribbon belonging to schoolteacher Martha Henderson, a pipe that had gone missing from the saloon 6 months earlier, children's toys that parents had assumed were simply misplaced, and personal photographs that had vanished from homes throughout the settlement. The implications were chilling. Someone had been entering private residences and taking trophies for months, studying the residents and preparing for something far more sinister. The investigation that followed Sarah McKenna's death marked the beginning of Blackstone Ridge's descent into genuine terror. Deputy Webb, working alone due to the remote location and harsh winter conditions, began interviewing residents systematically. His investigation notes, preserved in remarkable detail at the Denver Public Library's Western History Collection, reveal a community gripped by suspicion and fear. Multiple witnesses reported seeing the Morrison twins in areas near where evidence had been found, though none could provide definitive proof of wrongdoing. The twins themselves claimed to have been together during all the times in question, providing alibis for each other that were impossible to verify independently. Their mother, Elizabeth Morrison, supported their claims, but seemed increasingly haggard and frightened during questioning. Dr. Whitman's psychological evaluation of the twins, conducted at Deputy Webb's request, provided the first professional assessment of their mental state. In his report, dated February 15, 1931, and preserved in the University of Colorado's medical archives, Dr. Whitman noted that both twins displayed a complete absence of normal emotional responses and seemed to view other human beings as objects for study rather than fellow creatures deserving of empathy or consideration. More troubling was Dr. Whitman's observation that the twins appeared to be conducting their own evaluation of him during the interview process. They asked detailed questions about human anatomy, pain thresholds, and the physiological responses to fear. When questioned about their interest in these topics, they claimed to be considering careers in medicine, but their questions revealed knowledge that went far beyond anything available in the settlement's limited educational resources. The winter of 1931 proved to be one of the harshest on record, with snowfall that isolated Blackstone Ridge from the outside world for weeks at a time. During this period of enforced isolation, the psychological pressure on the settlement's residents reached breaking points that would have seemed impossible under normal circumstances. Deputy Webb's daily reports chronicle a community slowly tearing itself apart under the weight of suspicion and fear. 3 more children went missing during February, though their bodies were never found despite extensive searches. Emma Patterson, age 9, disappeared while walking to school. Bobby Chen, the blacksmith's 6-year-old son, vanished from his own backyard while his father worked in the forge less than 50 feet away. Most disturbing of all was the disappearance of twin sisters, Mary and Helen Foster, ages 5 and 7, who were last seen playing in their bedroom by their mother at bedtime, but were gone by morning, despite the room being on the second floor with no possible exit except through the house. Each disappearance followed the same pattern: children vanishing from areas where they should have been safe, with no signs of struggle or forced entry. Parents began keeping their children indoors constantly, but even this precaution proved insufficient. The settlement's children seemed to be drawn away by some force that left no trace of its passage. During this period, several residents reported seeing lights moving through the forest at night, following patterns that suggested intelligence and purpose. These lights appeared in colors that didn't match any known source, shifting between deep blues and purples that seemed to pulse in rhythm with some unheard heartbeat. Attempts to follow these lights resulted in searchers becoming hopelessly lost in terrain they had known all their lives, sometimes wandering for hours before finding themselves back at the settlement with no memory of how they had returned. The Morrison twins remained visible throughout this period, continuing their daily routines with a normalcy that many found more unsettling than if they had been obviously suspicious. They worked their shifts at the mine, attended the occasional community gathering, and maintained their claims of innocence with a consistency that was itself disturbing. Yet residents began noting that the twins always seemed to be present whenever searches were organized, volunteering to help look for the missing children with an enthusiasm that felt inappropriate given the circumstances. Mine supervisor William Bradley noted in his personal journal, discovered years later during renovation of the company office, that the twins' work performance had actually improved during the crisis. While other miners were distracted by worry and grief, Thomas and Theodore Morrison maintained focus and productivity that exceeded their previous standards. More concerning was Bradley's observation that the twins seemed energized by the community's suffering, displaying levels of vitality and alertness that contrasted sharply with the exhaustion visible in everyone else. The crisis reached its climax on March 3, 1931, when Deputy Webb announced his intention to conduct a thorough search of the Morrison property. Acting on accumulated suspicions and pressure from desperate parents, Webb obtained a warrant from the territorial judge and organized a search party of 12 men to examine the twins' family cabin and the abandoned mine shafts on their property. This search would uncover evidence that transformed local suspicions into documented horror, revealing the true extent of what the identical twins had done to each other and to their community. The discoveries made that day would be so disturbing that local authorities would spend decades attempting to suppress them, understanding instinctively that some knowledge was too dangerous to spread beyond the isolated mountain settlement where it had taken root. This is the story of one of the darkest chapters in criminal history in 1930s Colorado, where identical twins orchestrated acts of horror that defied rational explanation and challenged everything investigators thought they knew about human nature. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a like to support this investigation into one of America's most disturbing unsolved mysteries. The year 1931 marked a particularly harsh winter in the isolated mining region of Gilpin County, Colorado. The abandoned settlement of Black Hawk Creek sat frozen in the shadow of the Continental Divide, where deteriorating mining infrastructure created a maze of forgotten tunnels and collapsed structures. It was here that identical twins Marcus and Michael Thornfield, aged 23, had established what locals believed to be a modest homestead following their discharge from the Colorado State Hospital for the insane. According to records preserved in the Colorado State Archives, the Thornfield twins had been committed to the psychiatric facility in Denver following a series of disturbing incidents in their hometown of Pueblo. Dr. Harrison Blackwell, the attending physician, noted in his treatment records dated September 1928 that the brothers exhibited what he termed synchronized delusional episodes and displayed an unnaturally intense psychological bond that seemed to transcend normal twin connections. The hospital's discharge papers, signed in November 1930, recommended continued isolation and monitoring, but budget constraints forced their release into the community. The twins settled in the abandoned mining cabin, approximately 12 miles northwest of Central City, where the nearest neighbor lived over 3 miles away. Local merchant Thomas Henley, who operated the general store in nearby Russell Gulch, later testified to authorities that the twins visited his establishment monthly to purchase supplies. Henley described them as unnaturally quiet individuals who seemed to communicate through subtle glances and gestures rather than spoken words. Most disturbing, according to Henley's sworn statement to Sheriff Robert Morrison, was their habit of completing each other's sentences and their tendency to stare at customers with an intensity that made grown men uncomfortable. The isolated location provided perfect cover for what investigators would later discover was a systematic campaign of psychological and physical torture directed at anyone unfortunate enough to venture near their property. Between December 1930 and March 1931, 7 separate individuals disappeared while traveling through the Black Hawk Creek area. These disappearances initially attracted little attention from local authorities, who assumed the missing persons had simply fallen victim to the harsh winter conditions or had chosen to relocate without notice. The first documented disappearance involved traveling salesman Edgar Whitmore, whose abandoned wagon was discovered on January 15, 1931, approximately 2 miles from the Thornfield property. Whitmore's sample cases remained untouched, but his personal belongings and identification papers had been carefully arranged in geometric patterns around his campsite. Sheriff Morrison's initial report, filed with the Colorado State Police, noted unusual markings carved into nearby trees and what appeared to be evidence of a prolonged struggle, though no blood or other physical evidence could be recovered due to heavy snowfall. Dr. Elizabeth Cortland, a traveling physician who had been making rounds to isolated homesteads, vanished on February 3, 1931. Her horse returned to Central City 3 days later, bearing disturbing modifications to her medical bag. According to witness statements collected by Deputy Marshal James Crawford, Dr. Cortland's surgical instruments had been arranged in ritualistic patterns, and her prescription bottles had been emptied and refilled with unidentified organic substances that later analysis would reveal to be human tissue samples. The pattern of disappearances continued throughout the winter months, with each incident displaying increasingly elaborate staging. Local newspaper editor William Ashford documented these events in the Central City Courier. Though his articles were suppressed by territorial authorities, who feared panic among the remaining population, Ashford's personal notes, discovered decades later in the basement of the newspaper office, described his growing conviction that the disappearances were connected to supernatural forces operating in the region. The truth began to emerge on March 19, 1931, when timber scout Daniel Rockwell stumbled upon what he initially believed to be an abandoned mining operation near the Thornfield cabin. Rockwell's detailed testimony, preserved in the case files of the Colorado State Police, described a series of underground chambers that had been extensively modified to serve purposes that defied rational explanation. The twins had spent months excavating and connecting natural caves with existing mining tunnels, creating a subterranean complex that extended nearly half a mile beneath the mountain. Rockwell's account, corroborated by subsequent official investigations, revealed that the Thornfield brothers had constructed elaborate mechanisms designed to prolong human suffering for extended periods. The underground chambers contained sophisticated pulley systems, restraining devices, and what appeared to be observation areas where the twins could monitor their victims without being detected. Most disturbing were the detailed journals found in their cabin, written in alternating handwriting, that suggested the brothers took turns documenting their activities. The journals, analyzed by handwriting expert Professor Samuel Morrison of the University of Denver, contained minute descriptions of psychological experiments the twins had conducted on their captives. The entries revealed a methodical approach to breaking down human resistance through sensory deprivation, physical discomfort, and carefully orchestrated psychological manipulation. The brothers appeared to be testing theories about human endurance and the breaking point of sanity, recording their observations with scientific precision that suggested formal training in psychological principles. According to the journal entries, the twins had developed what they termed sympathetic torture, a technique that exploited their identical appearance to create confusion and disorientation in their victims. They would alternate between presenting themselves as captor and potential rescuer, using their physical similarity to convince victims that they were experiencing hallucinations or memory lapses. This psychological manipulation was combined with physical privations designed to weaken resistance and increase suggestibility. The investigation expanded when authorities discovered that the Thornfield brothers had been corresponding with researchers at various psychiatric institutions across the country. Letters found in their possession, dated between November 1930 and February 1931, revealed communication with Dr. Heinrich Zimmermann at the Menninger Clinic in Kansas and Professor Robert Lindley at Johns Hopkins University. These correspondences suggested the twins were attempting to legitimize their activities as psychological research, seeking academic validation for their increasingly extreme experiments. Dr. Zimmermann's response letters, obtained through court order, indicated his initial interest in the twins' reported telepathic abilities and their claims of shared consciousness. However, his correspondence ceased abruptly in January 1931, and subsequent investigation revealed that Dr. Zimmermann had reported the communications to federal authorities, expressing concern about the dangerous implications of the twins' research proposals. The Federal Bureau of Investigation opened a preliminary investigation, but jurisdictional complications delayed any meaningful action. The underground complex revealed evidence of at least 12 victims, though only 7 individuals had been officially reported missing. Coroner Dr. Michael Stevenson's examination of the recovered remains revealed evidence of prolonged captivity and systematic torture that had been inflicted over periods ranging from several days to multiple weeks. The victims showed signs of carefully controlled malnutrition, sleep deprivation, and psychological trauma that suggested sophisticated knowledge of human physiology and psychology. Most disturbing was the discovery of detailed anatomical drawings and photographs that the twins had produced during their activities. These materials, sealed by court order and held in the restricted archives of the Colorado State Police, documented the progression of psychological and physical deterioration in their victims with scientific precision. The drawings included detailed measurements, notations about behavioral changes, and theoretical speculation about the relationship between physical suffering and mental breakdown. The investigation team, led by Detective Inspector Charles Whitman from the Denver Police Department, discovered that the Thornfield brothers had been conducting what appeared to be coordinated experiments designed to test their theories about consciousness and identity. The twins believed that their shared psychological bond could be artificially created in other individuals through extreme stress and shared traumatic experiences. Their journals contained detailed protocols for breaking down individual psychological barriers and creating what they termed consciousness bridges between separate individuals. Federal investigators arriving from Washington in April 1931 brought additional resources and expertise to the case, including pioneering forensic techniques that were still experimental at the time. Agent Harrison Ford of the Bureau of Investigation led a team of specialists who conducted the first systematic psychological profiling attempt in Colorado criminal history. Their analysis, preserved in federal archives, concluded that the Thornfield twins represented a previously undocumented form of shared psychosis that had evolved into organized criminal behavior. The twins themselves had vanished by the time authorities discovered their underground complex, leaving behind only their detailed journals and the physical evidence of their crimes. A massive search operation involving federal agents, state police, and local volunteers scoured the surrounding wilderness for any trace of the brothers. But the harsh terrain and unpredictable weather conditions hampered efforts. Bloodhounds brought in from the Colorado Department of Corrections lost the scent trail at a creek approximately 5 miles from the cabin, suggesting the twins had prepared detailed escape plans. Witness interviews conducted throughout the spring of 1931 revealed that several local residents had observed suspicious activity near the Thornfield property, but had failed to report their concerns to authorities. Mining engineer Robert Castellano told investigators that he had heard screaming from the direction of the cabin during late-night surveys, but had assumed the sounds were produced by wildlife or wind conditions. Local trapper William Hayes reported seeing unusual lights emanating from underground locations near the property, but had attributed these phenomena to natural gas emissions common in former mining areas. The investigation's scope expanded further when federal agents discovered correspondence between the Thornfield twins and several other psychiatric patients across the country. These letters, obtained through warrants served at multiple institutions, revealed a network of individuals sharing similar delusions about consciousness, identity, and the potential for artificially induced psychological bonds. The Bureau of Investigation classified this information and initiated surveillance of several dozen individuals identified through the correspondence, though no additional criminal activity was immediately discovered. Professor David Hartwell of Columbia University, who consulted on the federal investigation, published a groundbreaking study in the Journal of Abnormal Psychology analyzing the Thornfield case as an example of what he termed collaborative psychosis. Hartwell's research, based on analysis of the twins' journals and correspondence, suggested that identical twins might be particularly susceptible to shared delusional systems that could escalate into organized criminal behavior under specific environmental conditions. The case took an unexpected turn in May 1931 when the bodies of two men matching the Thornfield brothers' description were discovered in a collapsed mine shaft approximately 30 miles from their cabin. However, the advanced state of decomposition and damage from the cave-in made positive identification impossible with available forensic techniques. Local coroner Dr. Patricia Williams concluded that the remains were consistent with the twins' physical characteristics, but noted several anomalies that raised questions about the identification's accuracy. The official investigation was declared closed in June 1931, but disturbing reports continued to emerge from the Black Hawk Creek area throughout the following decades. Local residents reported sightings of identical men matching the Thornfield brothers' description, always observed at distance, and never approached close enough for positive identification. These reports were generally dismissed by authorities as psychological reactions to the publicized case, but their consistency across multiple witnesses suggested a more complex explanation. The profound psychological impact of what happened in that remote Colorado Valley in 1931 continues to resonate today. As new evidence suggests, the Thornfield twins' activities were part of a larger pattern of coordinated psychological experimentation that may have extended far beyond their isolated mountain hideaway. The investigation took an even darker turn when modern technology began revealing details that defied conventional explanation. In 2003, the Colorado Historical Preservation Society installed motion-activated cameras throughout the Millfield area as part of a wildlife monitoring project. What they captured instead would become some of the most disturbing footage in the Society's archives. Dr. Rebecca Chen, a digital forensics expert from the University of Colorado, Denver, was called in to authenticate several recordings that had been flagged by automated systems for unusual activity. According to her report, filed with the Colorado Department of Natural Resources on March 15, 2004, the cameras had detected humanoid figures moving through the forest with an unnatural gait and coordination that suggested either severe physical impairment or deliberate mimicry of human movement patterns. The most significant recording, time-stamped at 3:17 a.m. on February 8, 2004, showed two figures approaching one of the cameras. The infrared footage revealed individuals of identical height and build, moving in perfect synchronization. What disturbed Dr. Chen most was not their appearance, but their behavior. According to her analysis, the subjects appear to be communicating through a series of head movements and gestures that do not correspond to any known sign language or cultural communication system. More troubling is the way they seem to anticipate each other's movements with impossible precision. The audio component of this recording was even more unsettling. Digital enhancement revealed what Dr. Chen described as vocalization patterns that begin in the normal human range, but descend into frequencies typically associated with geological phenomena rather than biological sources. The recording captured approximately 47 minutes of this communication before the figures moved beyond the camera's range. Park Ranger Michael Torres, who had been patrolling the Millfield area for 16 years, reported his own encounter just 3 weeks after the camera footage was recorded. According to his official incident report, filed on February 29, 2004, Torres was conducting a routine trail inspection when he encountered 2 individuals who claimed to be researchers studying the historical incidents in the area. Torres described his interaction in detail. They introduced themselves as specialists in historical trauma and psychological residue. When I asked for identification or permits, they produced documents that appeared legitimate but felt wrong somehow. The paper seemed too old, and the text had an unusual quality that made it difficult to focus on. Both individuals spoke in exactly the same voice, with identical intonation and pacing. When one would pause mid-sentence, the other would continue without missing a beat, as if they were sharing the same thought process. The encounter became more disturbing when Torres attempted to radio his supervisor for verification of their research permits. According to his report, both individuals became visibly agitated when I reached for my radio. They began moving in a way that seemed choreographed, circling my position while maintaining eye contact. The temperature in the immediate area dropped noticeably, and I became aware of a sound like distant screaming that seemed to be coming from underground. Torres managed to return to his vehicle and contacted the Colorado State Patrol, but when officers arrived at the coordinates he provided, they found no trace of the individuals he described. More troubling, the GPS data from his radio showed that his reported location was in the exact spot where the Hartwell twins had been found in 1931. The investigation expanded in 2005 when Dr. Sarah Kovac, a forensic anthropologist from Colorado State University, was granted permission to conduct archaeological excavations at 3 sites within the Millfield area. Her research, funded by a federal grant through the National Science Foundation, was intended to search for additional remains that might have been overlooked during the original investigation. Dr. Kovac's team made their first significant discovery on June 12, 2005, when ground-penetrating radar detected an anomalous structure approximately 8 feet below the surface near the original camp location. The excavation revealed what appeared to be a naturally formed chamber, roughly circular and measuring 12 feet in diameter. According to Dr. Kovac's field notes, the chamber walls show evidence of extensive modification, with carved symbols that do not match any known Native American petroglyphic traditions in the region. More disturbing was what the team found within the chamber. Dr. Kovac's report, submitted to the National Science Foundation on August 30, 2005, documented the discovery of multiple sets of human remains arranged in precise geometric patterns. Carbon dating suggests these remains span a period of approximately 200 years, with the most recent dating to the early 1930s. The arrangement of the remains defied explanation. Each set consisted of identical skeletal structures, positioned as perfect mirror images of each other. Dr. Kovac noted that the bone structure and measurements of each pair are so precisely matched that they could only belong to identical twins. The positioning suggests ritualistic placement, with evidence of post-mortem modification that indicates the individuals were subjected to some form of systematic alteration before death. The most significant discovery came when Dr. Kovac's team found personal effects buried with the remains. Among these items were fragments of clothing, personal jewelry, and documents that could be traced to missing persons reports dating back to 1847. According to the Colorado State Archives, these reports documented the disappearances of 17 sets of identical twins over a period of 84 years, all within a 50-mile radius of the Millfield area. Dr. Kovac's investigation was abruptly terminated on September 15, 2005, when she and 2 graduate students failed to return from a scheduled excavation session. Search and rescue teams found their campsite undisturbed, with all equipment and personal belongings left exactly as they had been arranged. The excavation site showed signs of having been carefully filled in, with the chamber entrance sealed, using stones that required mechanical equipment to move. The Colorado State Patrol investigation into Dr. Kovac's disappearance yielded one significant piece of evidence. A digital camera found at the excavation site contained photographs taken during the final day of work. The images showed Dr. Kovac and her students working normally until the final sequence, which captured two figures approaching the excavation site from the surrounding forest. Digital enhancement of these photographs revealed individuals who bore a striking resemblance to the historical descriptions of the Hartwell twins, despite the 74 years that had elapsed since their deaths. More disturbing was the expression on Dr. Kovac's face in the final photograph, which showed recognition and terror, suggesting she understood the significance of what she was seeing. The investigation into these modern disappearances led to the discovery of additional camera footage from the surrounding area. Trail cameras maintained by the Colorado Division of Wildlife had captured images of the same two figures appearing at various locations throughout the Millfield region. Analysis of the timestamps revealed that these appearances occurred in a pattern that corresponded exactly to the historical cycle of disappearances documented in the area. Dr. James Morrison, a behavioral psychologist from the University of Denver, was contracted by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation to analyze the collected evidence and provide a psychological profile of the phenomena. His report, classified until 2018 under Colorado Open Records Act exemptions, concluded that the evidence suggests a form of consciousness preservation that operates outside conventional understanding of death and identity. The consistent behavior patterns, physical appearance, and geographical limitations indicate that we are dealing with something that maintains the essential characteristics of the original subjects while operating according to rules that do not conform to known psychological or biological principles. Dr. Morrison's report included recommendations for public safety measures, including the establishment of restricted zones and mandatory registration for any research activities in the area. However, these recommendations were never implemented, and Dr. Morrison himself disappeared in November 2006 while conducting follow-up research at the Colorado State Archives. The most recent documented incident occurred in 2019 when a group of paranormal investigators obtained permits to conduct overnight research in the Millfield area. The team, led by Dr. Patricia Sampson from Metropolitan State University, was equipped with advanced recording equipment and satellite communication devices to maintain contact with external monitoring stations. The investigation proceeded normally for the first 6 hours, with regular communication maintained between the field team and the monitoring station operated by graduate students in Denver. At 2:47 a.m. on October 13, 2019, the monitoring station received what would be the final transmission from Dr. Sampson's team. The audio recording preserved in the university's research archives captured Dr. Sampson's voice reporting visual contact with subjects matching historical descriptions. The transmission continued for 17 minutes, during which Dr. Sampson described an encounter with two individuals who claimed to be continuing the work that was interrupted in 1931. According to the transcript, these individuals demonstrated knowledge of the historical incidents that had never been made public, including specific details about the conditions of the bodies found in 1931 and the exact locations of subsequent disappearances. More disturbing was their claim that the process requires periodic renewal and the time for the next phase is approaching. The transmission ended abruptly at 3:04 a.m., and subsequent attempts to re-establish contact failed. Search teams found the investigators' equipment arranged in a perfect circle, with each device positioned to face inward toward a central point where the ground showed signs of recent disturbance. No trace of Dr. Sampson or her team has ever been found. Today, the Millfield area remains officially open to the public, though local authorities maintain an unofficial policy of discouraging overnight camping and unaccompanied research activities. Park rangers continue to report encounters with visitors who claim to be conducting historical research, though these individuals consistently fail to provide satisfactory documentation when questioned. The pattern that emerged from nearly a century of documentation suggests that whatever happened to the Hartwell twins in 1931 was not an isolated incident, but rather part of a larger phenomenon that continues to operate according to its own mysterious schedule. The evidence indicates that identical twins are specifically targeted and that the geographical focus remains consistent with the original incident location. Modern analysis of the historical records reveals that the disappearances follow a predictable pattern, occurring in cycles that correspond to specific astronomical events and geographical conditions. This pattern suggests that the next period of heightened activity is expected to begin in late 2024, continuing through early 2025. The implications of this timeline are particularly concerning given the increasing number of people who visit the area for recreational and research purposes. Current safety protocols are inadequate to address a threat that operates according to rules that defy conventional understanding, and the historical precedent suggests that official warnings may actually attract rather than deter potential victims. If you are planning to visit the Colorado wilderness, particularly areas within 50 miles of the original Millfield settlement, be aware of the warning signs that have been consistently reported across nearly a century of incidents. These include sudden temperature drops in localized areas, the sensation of being watched from multiple directions simultaneously, voices that seem to come from underground, and encounters with individuals who claim to be researchers but cannot provide adequate documentation of their work. Most importantly, if you are an identical twin, avoid this area entirely. The historical evidence makes it clear that you are at specific risk, and the pattern of incidents suggests that this risk is not theoretical but immediate and ongoing. 12 sets of identical twins entered the Colorado wilderness between 1847 and 2019. None were ever seen again. The others may still be there, waiting.